So let me explain to everybody why Tapp is really one of the most odious figures in media. Now, that's a strong claim. I understand that. Many people will disagree with that. But there's a very clear and important reason as to why I say that. Because what he does is a superb job normalizing right-wing framing while acting like he's not doing that and he's just a straight shooter. And if anything, since he's anti-Trump, he has this out of like, you can't accuse me of doing right-wing framing. I'm the toughest guy on Trump that there is. But usually the nature of his criticisms of Trump are petty and silly and not really substantive. But that's what makes him so dangerous and so odious, is that as he acts like, I'm part of the resistance, and I'm a lefty, and I'm a straight shooter, he actually works overtime to normalize, a default right-wing agenda. Okay, so I have a great example of that here. He's talking to Pete Buttigieg about war, and look at the way in which Tapper's adversarial. He likes to, pride himself on being a tough interviewer and stuff. But look at the framing of the questions, because again, the trick is almost always in the framing. Like, what are the assumptions baked into your question? Because they're incredibly important. So let's watch and then we'll discuss.
President Trump met with his national security team on Friday to weigh this new possible peace deal with the Taliban that theoretically could end the war in Afghanistan. You have said that you agree with the president that U.S. service members need to come home and soon. But I want to share with you what retired General David Petraeus, who led service members in Afghanistan and Iraq under President Obama, wrote in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago, quote, "A complete military exit from Afghanistan today would be even more ill-advised and risky than the Obama administration's disengagement from Iraq in 2011. If the Trump administration orders a full pullout from Afghanistan, there is considerably less doubt about what will happen: full-blown civil war and the reestablishment of a terrorist sanctuary," unquote. Now, you told me in the CNN debates that you would bring U.S. service members home within your first year as president. Do you support the president's potential peace deal in Afghanistan, and how do you respond to the concerns of General Petraeus?
Well, the problem with the president's path is it seems to be dictated by the American political calendar. You add to that the fact that there doesn't seem to be any real role for the legitimately elected Afghan government, and it is a recipe for us winding up having to go back because of a problem that unfolds. Look, if we really want to leave well, and we're going to leave. Remember, leaving Afghanistan is the one thing that the right, the left, the Taliban, the government, and the international community all agree on. So the real question here is, are we going to leave well or are we going to leave poorly? To do it right, we need to make sure we get the basic assurances about counterterrorism that we need, and that the Afghan government is on the table so that there's a formula for stability. We have leverage in this conversation. It is in the interests of even the Taliban to make sure that we have the right kind of political settlement. But there has to be an actual strategy, and it can't be driven by the timeline of the American election. It has to be driven by our ability to get a deal that makes sense.
You told me that you wanted to get U.S. service members out within the first year. I mean, is that not too quickly?
Of course I want to I'd rather we be done with this today. I mean, right now, somebody is packing their bags for Afghanistan, 18 years after 9/11, wondering why we're there. It's very clear that we need to bring this to a close. Now, we may need some kind of special operations or intelligence capability, just as we would in many hotspots around the world, to protect American interests. But right now, the only way that we can get to that withdrawal, bring this thing to a close, is to have a political settlement that has the parties at the table. And while it's good to hear that there are talks going on, it's concerning to hear that those talks are leaving the Afghan government at the sidelines.
I mean, listen, Pete Buttigieg there was like doing a little bit of, he was being a politician, and he was giving like, well, listen, we got to get out as quick as possible, but I don't agree with the way in which Trump is getting out, yada, yada. So he was kind of being a standard politician there. But Tapper's questions were so bad that he made Pete Buttigieg look like he was way further to the left than he is. Because you heard it. Hey, you said you want to get out within the first year. Does it make sense to get out that quickly? Hey, look, listen to what General Petraeus, a criminal, by the way. By the way, General Petraeus also floated the idea of literally arming Al-Qaeda in Syria to fight ISIS. He literally floated that idea. But Jake Tapper, cites him like, well, he says this. So it's adversarial in defense of the status quo. That's what Jake Tapper is doing. He's adversarial in defense of the status quo, in defense of the military-industrial complex, in defense of business as usual. He's adversarial from a right-wing perspective. That's what that is. Now, he didn't have to frame the questions like that. The question is framed as Trump is looking to maybe get out of Afghanistan. Here's why that's a bad idea. Why do you disagree with the experts who say this is a bad idea? That is just disgusting, the way he framed that. Some questions that I would have asked if we were talking about Afghanistan? We've been there 18 years. What makes you think that staying there in 19th is going to change anything that wasn't changed in the first 18? That's definitely a question that I would ask. Hey, we've been there 18 years. What is the definition of victory, and when can we declare it and come home? See, that's an adversarial question on the side of the American people, and on the side of common sense, and on the side of getting out of this endless war. Another question I would ask is, we've wasted $2 trillion. At what point is it too much? How much would it have to cost? 3 trillion? 4 trillion? 5 trillion? How much would it have to cost in Afghanistan? Again, adversarial on the side of getting out. The Taliban today, here's another question you could ask. How is the war a good thing when the Taliban controls more territory today than they did when we originally invaded? How can you justify the war when the Taliban controls more of the territory today than they did when we originally invaded? Here's another one. The original reason given to going into Afghanistan was to get Osama bin Laden. He's now been dead for years, so how can we justify staying there? Again, listen, guys, I'm not a fucking genius over here, okay? I'm just going, here's the reality. Maybe I should base questions off of the reality, and maybe I should be adversarial from the perspective that the American people agree with, which brings me to the last question you could ask on Afghanistan, which is, the Afghanistan war, as of 2013, polled with a 17% favorability, which means the war in Afghanistan is more unpopular than the war in Vietnam. Given that fact, you would have to convince the American people as to why we should stay there. So go ahead, make your argument as to why we should stay there against the wishes of the overwhelming majority of the American people. See, guys, these are the questions that a real journalist who's adversarial against power would ask. But Tapp Jaker is not that. He's the exact opposite. And this is why, by the way, he's taken so seriously and beloved in these elite circles, is because he's faux adversarial. It's like everything backs up the establishment that he talks about. So he's got the perfect mix of ooh, I'm really anti-Trump and isn't that awesome? I'm going to tone police him for his tweets. And then, in the next breath, say war is always good and tax cuts are good and corporations are great. And it's disgusting, man. He does such a terrible job. And you need to be able to see through his particular brand of shittiness because it's unique. And it's odious because people don't even realize that that's what he's doing. See, somebody who's not as versed in this stuff as I am and you are might watch that segment and go, ooh, that's interesting. So he's asking a tough question of Pete Buttigieg and asking a tough question of, what the Trump administration is trying to do now in Afghanistan. But again, the perspective matters. Everybody's got an ideology. It's just a matter of, how are you framing the questions to coincide with that ideology? And Jake Tapper's, in a subtle way, letting it out here, that his ideology is pro-war, pro-status quo, pro-military industrial complex. And that, the perspective is anybody who wants to draw down in these wars, the burden's on them to say, why that's a good thing. When in reality, it should be the opposite, that the burden's on the warmongers to explain why endless war is always the right thing.